On January 8, 2004, the last sewing machine in the last Levi Strauss factory in the United States went quiet in San Antonio, Texas. 800 people lost their jobs that day. More than a century of American manufacturing in the company that arguably invented the American uniform simply stopped. That same year, the family that owns Levi Strauss wasn't struggling, not even close. Within 15 years, their stake in the company would be worth billions more than it had ever been worth before. This is Levi's, the company that put America in blue jeans, miners, cowboys, soldiers, rebels, presidents. For a century and a half, almost nobody in this country hasn't owned a pair. Look in your own closet right now. There's a decent chance a pair of jeans is hanging there, and a decent chance at least one of them, at some point in your life, has had this company's name stitched into the back pocket. And by the time the company finally stopped making them here, almost nobody noticed exactly when it happened. The story starts, like a lot of American fortunes, with the gold rush. Levi Strauss was born in Bavaria in 1829. After his father died, he emigrated to New York as a teenager with his mother and sister, joining half-brothers who already ran a small dry goods business. He learned the trade the way most immigrants did back then, slowly, on the ground, peddling goods door to door, before working his way into the family business properly. In 1853, with reports of gold pulling thousands of fortune seekers to California, Strauss traveled west and opened his own dry goods company in San Francisco. He wasn't panning for gold himself, he was selling supplies to the people who were. That's usually the safer bet in a gold rush, and Strauss knew it.
20 years later, a Reno, Nevada tailor named Jacob Davis gave him a much better idea. Davis made work pants for local laborers, and he kept hearing the same complaint: the pockets ripped out almost immediately under hard use. His solution was simple: metal rivets hammered in at the exact points where the fabric tore. The idea reportedly started with something almost mundane: a laborer's wife asking Davis for a pair of pants sturdy enough to actually survive her husband's work. Davis solved a problem for one customer and accidentally solved it for an entire industry. It worked. His customers loved it. There was just one problem: Davis didn't have the money to file a patent on his own. So he wrote to his fabric supplier, a San Francisco merchant he already did business with regularly, Levi Strauss. Davis offered him a partnership. Strauss puts up the money for the patent, and the two of them share it. Strauss agreed. On May 20, 1873, the two men were jointly granted a patent for what the paperwork called an improvement in fastening pocket openings. Blue jeans, as the world would eventually know them, were born that day. And it's worth remembering that the man whose name ended up on every pair never actually invented the rivet. A tailor from Reno did. He just couldn't afford the paperwork alone. For the next several decades, jeans stayed exactly what they were built to be: workwear. Tough pants for miners, ranchers, railroad crews, and laborers who needed something that could survive real punishment. Then, in the middle of the 20th century, something happened that had nothing to do with durability at all. In 1955, a young actor named James Dean appeared on screen in Rebel Without a Cause, wearing a white t-shirt, a leather jacket, and a pair of jeans.
The image became one of the most reproduced photographs in the history of American pop culture. It's hard to overstate how strange that transformation actually was. A garment built for miners kneeling in cold creek water somehow became, within a single generation, the exact opposite kind of symbol: youth, defiance, a refusal to dress the way your parents expected you to. Almost overnight, denim stopped being just something you wore to work. It became something you wore to say something. Through the 1960s and 70s, jeans became the uniform of an entire generational rebellion. And Levi's, the company whose name was already permanently stitched into the garment's history, rode that wave about as far as any American company ever has. In 1971, Levi Strauss & Company went public for the first time. By the early 1980s, the company was operating around 63 manufacturing plants across the United States. It was, by any measure, one of the largest garment manufacturers on the planet. Then, in 1985, the founder's descendants, led by a great-great-grandnephew named Robert Haas, took the company private again in a leveraged buyout worth roughly $1.5 billion. The stated goal was simple: concentrate ownership, tighten control, and set the company up for the next chapter. Going private meant the family no longer had to answer to public shareholders demanding quarterly results. It also meant that whatever the company earned from here on out would flow much more directly back to the people who now owned it outright. That next chapter turned out to be extraordinarily profitable. just not, eventually, for everyone involved.
Through the late 1980s and into the 1990s, Haas and the head of Levi's international operations, Thomas Tuscher, repositioned the classic 501 as a premium product overseas. They opened boutique stores across Europe and Japan and priced the exact same jeans at more than double what they cost in an American discount store. In one telling example,
One of those workers, Viola Casares, helped organize boycotts and pickets in protest. It wouldn't be the last time she'd have reason to. By the late 1990s, Levi's revenue had peaked and started sliding, and the company's answer arrived in a series of increasingly large waves. In November of 1997, citing excess domestic production capacity, Levi's closed 11 plants across North America in a single announcement. Roughly 6,395 jobs disappeared at once, about a third of the company's entire American manufacturing workforce, gone in one press release. Most of those plants sat in small southern towns where the local Levi's factory wasn't just a job, it was often the largest employer for miles, the kind of place where entire families had worked the same lines for 2 and 3 generations. Severance packages, according to the Apparel Workers Union, topped out around $10,000, even for the most senior employees who'd given decades to the company. Revenue kept falling anyway. 7 straight years of decline, from that $7.1 billion peak in 1996 down to around $4.1 billion by 2002. The company's global workforce shrunk from more than 37,000 people in 1996 to roughly 12,000 by early 2004. And then, in September of 2003, Levi's announced the closures that would finally end it completely. The last 2 American sewing and finishing plants, both in San Antonio, would shut down. So would the company's 3 remaining plants across the border in Canada. Nearly 2,000 more jobs, gone. A company spokesman explained the decision the way these decisions almost always get explained.
the company had tried its best to keep manufacturing in the United States, he said, but had to remain competitive to survive at all. On January 8, 2004, it finally happened. L.S. Strauss plants closed for good. More than 150 years after Levi Strauss first opened a dry goods store in Gold Rush, San Francisco, the company that put America in blue jeans stopped making them in America entirely. Workers who'd spent their whole careers on that San Antonio line walked out that final morning into a job market that had very little use for their specific decades of experience. Sewing skilled enough to build a pair of jeans that would survive years of hard wear doesn't automatically translate into much of anything else. A few months later, the last company-owned factories in Western Europe closed too, in Spain, ending Levi's owned manufacturing on that continent as well. Here's the part of the story that's easy to miss if you only follow the plant closures. The Haas family wasn't struggling through any of this. While thousands of American and European workers were losing jobs they'd held for decades, the family that controlled Levi Strauss & Company was sitting on one of the most successful corporate turnarounds in modern retail history. In March of 2019, Levi Strauss went public for the second time in its history, 34 years after that 1985 buyout. Shares surged roughly 32% on their first day of trading, pushing the company's total value past $8 billion. The Haas family retained about 75% ownership and even more voting control, thanks to a dual-class stock structure. Family members collectively cashed out and held stock worth more than $4.7 billion.
Their original 1985 buyout stake, purchased at roughly $50 a share, was now worth more than 9 times that. Put those two numbers side by side for a second. 800 jobs, gone, in a single Texas city on a January morning in 2004. $4.7 billion in the same family's pocket 15 years later. Both of those are part of the exact same company's story. Neither one erases the other. Levi Strauss & Company will tell you, accurately, that global competition in the apparel industry left it very little choice. Cheaper labor overseas, thinner margins at home, and rivals who'd already moved production years earlier all made the American manufacturing model increasingly difficult to sustain. Former workers like Viola Casares will tell you something else, that the company they gave decades of labor to stopped feeling like the family it once claimed to be, right around the time protecting that family's wealth became more important than protecting their jobs. Both of those things can be true. That's usually how these stories actually work, whether or not it's the version that fits neatly into a single headline. Today, Levi's jeans are made almost entirely overseas, by contract manufacturers the company doesn't own, in countries the company rarely names publicly. A small number of specialty Made in USA collections exist, mostly as a nod to heritage rather than any real return to domestic production at scale. The company itself has never been more valuable. The name has never been more recognized. Somewhere on almost every continent on Earth right now, someone is wearing a pair of jeans that traces its entire design back to a Nevada tailor's rivet and a San Francisco dry goods merchant's willingness to pay for the paperwork.
What's changed isn't the jeans, it's who's making them, and where, and what happened to the people who used to. Jacob Davis never got his name on the label. He got a job as factory manager and a share of a patent, and that was apparently enough for him. It's worth wondering what he would have made of a company built on his invention, eventually finding it more profitable to make that invention almost anywhere except where it started. That's the part of the story the label never mentions.